Welcome to the National Women's Fitness Academy podcast. We're here to talk about women's health, female hormones, body image, and all things health and fitness.
Hello, girls, and welcome back to another episode of the Women's Fitness Academies podcast. I'm your host, Siggy, and today is going to be a great one because, as we know, March is the month of awareness for endo and various hormonal issues that many of us have struggled and may still be struggling. And what a better way to have my beautiful Jazmine, who is a women's health nutritionist. And for those who don't know Jazmine, her coaching business, JH Total Wellness, stands for compassionate, comprehensive, and evidence-based approach to health and wellness, while prioritizing personalized care, education, and holistic strategies to empower women to achieve optimal health and live their best lives to the fullest. Jazmine, welcome on board.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for jumping on. Now, we know that over the years, including myself, we've gone through the ebbs and flow of hormonal issues, of trying to figure out what's wrong with our guts, why are we gaining weight, why are we losing weight? And I would love to know, in your experience as a women's health nutritionist, what are some of the most common misconceptions surrounding conditions like endometriosis or PCOS when it comes to our nutrition and lifestyle choices?
I think the biggest thing that I personally see, nutrition and lifestyle aside, is women being prescribed the oral contraceptive pill for any of these hormonal issues. And it's just a band-aid that is going to give you temporary relief from, pain that you might get with endo, or regulate your cycle if you have an irregular cycle, if you have PCOS, and it actually further disrupts your hormones in the long run. So many women that come to me are on a pill, and we get them off of that to, regulate their cycle and rebalance their hormones, because it's just doing more damage than good. So that's probably the biggest thing that I see all too often. If we are talking about PCOS specifically, the biggest thing, if we're focusing on nutrition and lifestyle, is a lot of women get told to eat less and move more, which is just really, really poor advice. So women with PCOS often have high insulin levels. I think it's about 70% of women with PCOS have high insulin. And this drives inflammation, and it also causes the body to hold on to weight. So that's why they typically have excess weight that's really hard to lose. So telling them to eat less and move more is, one, doing more stress to the body, because under eating is a huge stress on the body. And more often than not, there's a lot of inflammation happening on a deeper level, and excess exercise can cause more stress as well. So actually managing insulin levels is the number one thing that we want to do to help with that. And a lot of women do get told to take metformin, which is a pharmaceutical to help lower insulin levels, whether you have PCOS or diabetes, but that comes with an array of nasty side effects. So there is actually a lot of natural supplements that can be as effective as metformin to reduce insulin that don't come with all the nasty side effects. And something as simple as going for a 10-minute walk after your main meal is actually being shown to be as effective as metformin to lower insulin. So nutrition and lifestyle is really, really important to address, instead of just like throwing a band-aid pill at something. And then if we're looking at endometriosis specifically, a lot of women get told to have a laparoscopy, which is the surgery to remove the endo, which is all well and good, but that can cause a lot of scar tissue. It can cause a lot of trauma to the reproductive area. And you actually should really make sure you manage it post-surgery, because it can go back by up to 20% in the first year if you don't manage the contributing factors that make endo worse. So the biggest thing that women with endo want to do is eat a anti-inflammatory type diet. So trying to eat as much whole foods as possible and as little processed foods as possible to reduce those inflammation levels in the body. Because I think with a lot of hormone issues, well, I say hormone issues like PCOS and endo, and women think they're hormone issues. But for example, endo is actually a immune and inflammatory condition, but it's then further influenced by hormones, right? Because obviously it's in the reproductive area. So yeah, managing inflammation is like probably the biggest piece of the puzzle that we need to focus on when it comes to endo. Yeah.
When we're speaking about PCOS, I want to come back to endo in a second. When it comes to nutrition around PCOS, someone who doesn't know what insulin is, how will they be able to balance that?
Mm-hmm. So what happens is if we are eating constantly high carbohydrate meals, like lots of breads and pastas, nothing wrong with them. But if we don't have a balanced meal, these are spiking our blood sugar, right? So that food is getting converted into blood glucose, and our pancreas releases insulin to help shuttle that blood glucose into the cells so we can then use it as energy. But a big problem these days is that we are having these high carbohydrate meals and we're not using that energy. You know, we're probably sitting at our desks, we're studying, whatever it is. We are just typically living more sedentary lives these days. So our blood glucose is then consistently elevated, and the pancreas is then working overtime, releasing all this excess insulin to deal with that. Yeah. So we want to balance our meals as much as we can. Like, so many women that come to me do not eat enough protein. I'm like, okay, let's have a look at your day. You know, what are you eating? And they're like, oh, I might have a piece of toast for breakfast, sandwich for lunch, you know, some pasta for dinner. And I'm like, baby girl, where's the protein? You know what I mean? Like, is there any piece of protein there at all? So we really want to prioritize protein with every single meal that we eat, because it is a lot denser, I guess you could say, in the gut. So it takes the gut a lot longer to digest it and process it compared to carbohydrates. So instead of getting this big spike that we would get from a high carbohydrate meal, we've got a more gradual increase because the body's working harder to digest that protein, which kind of, reduces that carbohydrate spike that we would get. So that's probably the biggest thing that women should focus on to help balance those blood glucose levels. And then that has the flow-on effect to managing the insulin.
It kind of reminds me of a kid with a bag of lollies, and they get that sugar high and they go all the way up and they're like doing parkour on all the furniture in the house. And then all of a sudden, like 3 o'clock, they just like collapse. They're tired, they're miserable, they start crying. They're like, I want something to obviously balance the sugar that I've had. And it's very similar to, it's very common for women, as you mentioned, for those who are having like the piece of toast or the sandwich or the carbs. Like, there's no balance there. It's no steadiness. It's like the up and down, up and down. So it makes so much sense why too often women are having those struggles with energy where it's like fluctuating constantly. So what does a balanced meal look like for an average woman who's wanting to work on her nutrition?
Yeah, so if we're focusing on protein, we think of beef, chicken, eggs, fish. Obviously, you can, if you need to, supplement with protein powders, but I always say food first and then extra kind of additionals on top of that if you're struggling. So if we look at, I guess, a balanced plate, we want to have minimum 30 grams of protein per meal. So we're going to have, 4 eggs as an omelet maybe for breakfast, or we're going to have, at least 2 fistfuls of chicken or beef, having, a good chunk of protein with that meal. And then by all means, we still need carbohydrates for energy. The brain needs, I think, about 120 grams of carbs. per day just to function. So they're not bad. We need them. But yeah, pairing then your pasta, your potatoes, whatever it might be, with that protein to create that balanced meal. And then healthy fats are really, really important for hormones as well. So think like avocado, nuts, seeds, coconut oil, ghee, grass-fed butter, things along those lines. Having a little bit of everything on that plate is going to, create that balanced meal.
The fact that, as you mentioned, it's only 120 grams per carbs that we need a day, I'm like, that's not even that much when you think about it.
And that's just for your brain, let alone everything else.
It's just wild. And like, as we're chatting here, and there may be women going, oh, I probably don't even hit that. So maybe that's something that a lot of the women who are listening to look at how much more of a balanced meal, they're needing to support their hormones. You mentioned endo, and March is the endometriosis awareness month for it. And you also mentioned around nutrition, which is a big emphasis around endo because it is inflammatory, and a lot of women who do suffer it, and I know friends who have it, suffer a lot when they do have the processed foods and we have the gluten and dairy. Now, it's something that obviously we need to be very mindful because, again, as coaches ourselves, we're not wanting to bring that restriction to someone's life, because then it goes like that black and white thinking, and then the stress erupts when they're going out and socializing. It's just like, well, I can't do this, I can't do that. So what are some things that you've noticed that have helped your clients around managing their endo around nutrition?
I have endo myself, so this is very close to my heart, and I know how difficult it can be. It's been a journey for myself to actually be able to put it into almost remission. But yeah, it is hard work. Like, I'm not going to pretend like it's easy. You do really have to be very mindful and very onto it. And really understand what you're putting in your body. And that takes time. Like, I think a lot of people want, this overnight results from the kind of fast-paced society, or fad diets and quick fixes that we may have done in the past. But when it comes to these deeper health issues like endo, it's going to take time to understand what you should consume, what you shouldn't, make those changes, make it part of your lifestyle, and just keep it at the forefront of your brain so that you can constantly manage it. So the number one thing that we want to limit as much as we can is gluten, because it is an unfortunate fact that gluten causes damage to the gut lining, and that gut lining being damaged elevates inflammatory markers in our body, which then causes more inflammation in regards to endometriosis. So unfortunately, gluten is in so many things these days, but with the rise of people, or I guess the rise of awareness in regards to people that have celiac disease or gluten intolerance, there is so much more variety out there nowadays. And especially when you are going out to cafes and restaurants and social outings, there is always gluten-free options. And I don't think I've ever come across a menu that doesn't have a gluten-free option. But I always just say to people, just say, excuse me, waiter, like, do you guys have a gluten-free option, or is there something you can swap it out with? Or if you're not sure, if you're still learning, you're not kind of sure what's in what, just ask, don't be afraid. But I would say that's the biggest thing to be aware of. But when we are consuming a majority, whole foods diet, that's mostly meat and protein and lots of veg and lots of fruit, and then some whole grains here and there, majority of that is gluten-free anyway. So it's only when you start to lean towards your more processed foods that they're probably going to contain gluten.
I'm usually the first one when we go to restaurants and asking about gluten-free options. Like, I'm the annoying person who has no filter, and I'll be like, is this gluten-free? What's gluten-free? And I'll actually get the whole menu looked at. I'm like, are you sure? Like, I would even question the waiter. I'm like, are you sure this is gluten-free? And they're questioning themselves, and they have to go to the chef and ask question. But as you said, it's better to ask the question instead of, having those symptoms later on. And I'm sure you've had those endo reactions of whatever food you've eaten to being like consistent pain, which is not ideal. So it's also questioning yourself for those who have endo. It's going, okay, well, would you rather eat the beautiful glutinous meal, but then for days you're in bed, like in so much pain, or be the annoying person in the restaurant and ask for gluten-free option and then be able to continue on with your day without having that pain?
Yeah, exactly. And like you say, I don't want to be the annoying person, but if you are taking care of your health and you're putting your health first, I don't see that as being the annoying person. I just see that as I'm wanting to take care of my health. I'm not wanting to have an endo flare. So I'm going to ask the waiter. This is their job. So I'm gonna ask them. And yeah, as you learn to manage it and you learn what swaps you need to make and what have you, it then does just become a part of your life and how you live, and they all become, subconscious habits that you have. So then it doesn't feel like a chore and it doesn't feel like a burden, and you just now know how to take care of your health and your life. So I think personally, I would rather spend the time going through, labels and asking waiters and being the quote unquote annoying person so that I don't have endo flares, because otherwise, if I do, it's so debilitating and I can be in bed for a whole day, or I might not necessarily feel the effects of it immediately. But then when I get my next period, I'm passed out on the bathroom floor having hot and cold flushes, loose stools, vomiting because of the inflammatory foods that I've had in the last month. So I know I would rather take another second or two to be mindful of what I'm consuming instead of, living in pain. So it's just, yeah, once you get used to it, then it can be manageable and it doesn't feel so detrimental.
For someone who's not aware so much about their nutrition decisions and their lifestyle, and when the period does come and they're not sure if it is the nutrition side of things, because as you mentioned, it's not necessarily, you won't necessarily get affected by it straight away. It might be, a week later or 2 weeks later. So my question is, how can someone pinpoint exactly if it was the nutrition, or maybe it was, I don't know, the mascara or the makeup they were wearing, or some toxic form that made their gut fill with inflammation?
I think the majority of it is going to be the food, yeah, because that is what we are digesting, absorbing, assimilating, and that is what's going to cause the most inflammation immediately. Something like toxic products, makeup, skincare, etc. That's more something that kind of builds up over time, over the years. So you might not necessarily feel that straight away. So yeah, I would say 99% of the time is going to be a certain food that you're eating. And keeping a food journal can be really beneficial to help with that. So you can note down, okay, I'm feeling like this. What have I eaten in the last couple of days? You can look back. That's probably going to be the easiest thing. But obviously, we're also busy, so that might not be realistic. But yeah, 99% of the time it is going to be certain foods that you've eaten.
Good to know, because I'm sure like some people will be thinking about this. And I know I've thought about this several times when I would get a painful period and I'll be like, oh, was that the nutrition? Was that this month? Or was it like a certain environment that I stayed in, or like a certain week of stress? So again, as you mentioned, it's just monitoring and seeing if it's that instant effect of food or if it's something completely different.
And your period is actually reflective of the last 90 days. So it might not necessarily have been the past month, but 3 months ago, you might have had such a hectic, stressful month at work, with your relationship life, etc. You might have been making like poorer food choices because of that stress and what have you. So then that's in the past now, and you're not thinking about that. But then 2 months later, you have a painful period and you've forgotten all about it. Be like, oh, but I was so good the last month. Like, what have I done? But yeah, 90 days is reflective of your cycle. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind.
I think everyone should keep that in mind because there's like that old school way of thinking going, oh, I was stressed last week and this is why my period is heavy, or this is why mood is just like, nah, babe, like it's been 90 days. What happened, as you mentioned, like what happened 90 days ago. So it's a good way of detecting it.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of just having a bit of a check-in with yourself.
100%. Speaking of check-ins, we know you're very passionate about gut health, and it has increasingly, we know it's increasingly linked to aspects of our health. And I would love for us to dive into understanding better how does gut health impact conditions like endometriosis, PCOS, acne. I noticed that's a really big impact for many women, whether they're in, you know, the late teens, early 20s. Even women close to their 40s are having certain struggles around acne, and we know there's some connection around the gut health. So I would love to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, honestly, a lot of hormone issues that women deal with are having a flow-on effect from the gut. So a lot of the time, it's actually gut issues, but they are presenting as hormone issues. So there's like, for example, when it comes to endometriosis, there's like 21 different things happening in the body that can be causing endo. Obviously, it might not be one specific thing. It could be multiple, but there is a massive correlation with endometriosis and the gut. So the biggest thing that is exacerbating endo inflammation, like we briefly touched on before, is the inflammation that's happening in the gut. Now, what we see a lot these days is intestinal permeability. So a lot of people might know that as leaky gut. So what that is the lining of your gut wall is meant to be nice and strong, like a brick wall. Over the years, gluten, alcohol, antibiotics, stress, all the fun things are like damaging your gut lining, making it loose, right? And this is a massive stress on the body, a massive form of inflammation, because what happens is this elevates gram-negative bacteria, like specifically lipopolysaccharides, and that bacteria produce inflammatory mediators, right? So more often than not, if a woman with endometriosis does a urine sample, this bacteria is actually going to be high compared to women who don't have it. So healing that gut lining to reduce inflammation in all aspects of the body is like the number one thing that we want to do, because who was it that said it? I think Hippocrates once said all disease begins in the gut, and he was like absolutely right. So the leaky gut has been shown to drive disease in all aspects of the body. It's actually similar for PCOS and insulin resistance. So it's shown that the increased permeability, that leaky gut, triggers the continuous release of these gram-negative bacteria, and that leads to this chronic low-grade state of inflammation in the body, right? So people often think that chronic means it's been happening like for years on end, but chronic by definition, like in the health industry, is it's been happening consistently for 3 or more months, which is really not that long, right? So this continuous release of this gram-negative bacteria is causing the inflammation, and then the immune system gets activated to deal with this. And this actually interferes with the insulin receptor, driving insulin levels, which boosts testosterone production in the ovaries, leading to PCOS. So this intestinal permeability, this leaky gut, is something that we like really, really need to address.
And speaking of addressing gut health, we had a question from Sophie Jane, and she asked, how do you go about finding what harms your gut? Is it just trial or error? And I asked her in depth exactly what did she mean by this, and she said that sometimes for herself, she feels quite bloated if she eats dairy. So she tries to reduce her dairy intake. But for someone who's struggling with gut health and, needing to eliminate foods, does she need to go and get certain tests medically, or is it an intolerance? Like, what are some ways to go about this?
Any food tolerance is a sign that the gut's not functioning properly. So if the gut is in an optimal place, it's doing what it's supposed to, there's no intestinal permeability, there's enough stomach acid and digestive enzymes and what have you, we shouldn't have any food intolerances at all, right? So that is having a food intolerance in itself is the number one sign that there's a gut issue, something happening on a deeper level. We can, when we do blood work analysis, determine the type of intestinal permeability that you have, and if there is a bacterial overgrowth like candida, parasite, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So we can see that through your bloods, which we also pair with signs and symptoms that are happening in your body, because your body is like trying to talk to you through all those signs and symptoms, right? So there is certain foods that are going to not be good for your gut, such as gluten, which we had just discussed, as well as, unfortunately, antibiotics are really damaging to the gut. They do have their place if necessary, widely kind of overused. So that is something that we want to be mindful of. Alcohol, we know it's fun, but obviously it's not a health food, right? And I think there's a lot of misconception around dairy, whether it's inflammatory or not. And it's actually just dependent on the type of dairy, right? So the kind of dairy that we buy from Coles and Woolies these days is homogenized and pasteurized, and that heating process takes out the bacteria, but it also wipes all the really good digestive enzymes and our fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, which are really amazing for our health, right? So obviously that process is beneficial to make it last longer on the shelves and what have you, but because then all of the good stuff in it is now been taken out, it makes it a lot harder for our body to digest, and that end product often doesn't have lactase in it, which is the enzyme that we need to properly digest dairy. So it's not necessarily dairy itself that's inflammatory, but it's the type of dairy that we kind of have in this modern world that we're living in.
Good to know, because I know a lot of us love dairy. So now we have a better understanding of what types of dairy are going to be more beneficial, and yet to still be able to support our gut health as well. And to finish off, like, what are some strategies for women who can employ a little bit more to support their healthy gut health?
The biggest thing that I say to all my clients is to slow cook your foods. Like, go get yourself a slow cooker. I think they're like $35 from Kmart or something. It's not a big expense to add to your kitchen. But when we slow cook our meat, it releases all the collagen and glutamine, which is the two most important ingredients to support that intestinal permeability, keep that gut lining nice and strong. And if you think of like a brisket, how soft and juicy that is, how easy that is for your gut to then digest it and absorb all of your vitamins and minerals from it, right? So that's my number one tip, is slow cook your meat where you can, and steer clear of raw veg, because it actually decreases your pancreatic enzymes, which we need for digestion. So, roast, slow cook, saute, steam your veg. You don't make friends with salad. People think, oh, I'm eating healthy, I'm eating a salad. And it's like, that might actually not be the best thing for your gut at this point in time. Love cooking with ghee and butter, because they're really high in our fat-soluble vitamins, but also butyric acid, which lowers inflammation in the gut. Also cook with coconut oil, because it's antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory. Also really good sunscreen, mouthwash, lube, but that's another conversation in itself. And sardines, they're super high in omega-3 and EPA EPA and DHA. If you actually look at a little tin of sardines compared to a cod liver oil or fish oil supplement, that little tin of sardines is higher in omega-3s than the supplement. So pop those on your plate. Also an excellent source of calcium, which help zip up those gap junctions that help that intestinal permeability. And I think a big thing that's overlooked is like fresh herbs. These are absolutely amazing. They support your digestion. They have anti-inflammatory detoxification pathways. Like turmeric is a really good anti-inflammatory. Ginger actually supports the migrating motor complex in your gut, which is like a reoccurring motility pattern that occurs in the small bowel, and that helps it clear and cleanse the stomach for its next meal. So adding all of those in. Peppermint and peppermint tea, that's really amazing for women with PCOS as well, to help reduce excess androgens and testosterone. And with women with endo, something that is typically very sluggish is your detoxification pathways, specifically your liver. So all those herbs are really going to help with that. And because women with endo, we typically have high inflammation levels, that the sardines, those omega-3s, are really going to help reduce that as well.
I'm getting hungry just you mentioning all these foods. And you know what? It's really good to know that we can get so many nutrients and vitamins from food, because too often people will just go for the easy route, which is a supplement or a probiotic. And I think that's a conversation for another time, because again, there's a time and place to have the pre and probiotics. And I think a lot of people get confused around, what do I have? When do I have it? I just love the fact that you mentioned that sardines are higher than your usual oils, because I literally smash that on a daily basis.
Yes. So good. Yeah, I knew they were high. And then a few months ago, I looked at it to double check. And I was like, oh my goodness, like it's actually higher. Like these are a superfood. And I know that a lot of people who don't necessarily like seafood might be like, ew, like I can't deal with it. But my little trick that I do is I mash an avo with a tin of sardines. I put a ton of lemon in it, a ton of salt, mash it up, and then put it on my sourdough or my rice cakes or whatever. And the lemon and the salt just cuts through that fishy taste. So if you don't like sardines, try that.
Sounds amazing. I know what I'm going to be having for lunch.
So good.
Jazmine, before we head off, where can our listeners find you?
Mainly on Instagram. So my Instagram is JH Total Wellness, and you can contact me via there. And yeah, I would love to chat to you guys.
Amazing. Well, girls, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Please make sure to screenshot and tag us, and then let's start achieving more optimal health to living our fullest and healthiest lives.